Welcome, my friends, to the Sage Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, Christopher Gardner returns to the show. Christopher offers his insights into the concept of the fourth wall and how our consciousness is attached to the fiction of our own personal drama. However, if we view our experiences like the cameraman and boom operator on a soundstage who never attached themselves to what is being filmed, then liberation from the matrix is possible. And so without further ado, here's Christopher Gardner. Well, Christopher, welcome back to the show. And every time you're on the show, we have some great conversations. They're very philosophical, and we talk about a broad spectrum of ideas and thoughts. And I really, really enjoy that. I know the audience enjoys it too, because I receive a lot of feedback, very good feedback when you're on the show. Now, we have been diving into, as you know, myself, Sophia, yourself, about how the natural environment, our organic environment, is being altered. And today what we have is, unbeknownst to virtually most people, is an unnatural environment in which we're operating in. And I'm not just talking about the environment that we walk around in and, go to work and stuff like that, but I'm talking about everything. It's the water, it's the food, it's just everything. It's really not the way it was intended to be. And so there is this transformation that's taking place. And it's a transformation, in my view, and I know that you're going to agree with, that is not for the better. And so I know that you're down in Costa Rica and you're doing a lot of incredible work with regard to trying to bring the natural environment back. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what those things are that you're doing so that we can kind of set the stage and progress through the conversation.
Well, it's pretty interesting. I moved to Costa Rica with a few different contexts in mind, but one was food sovereignty. I had gotten really ill in the United States. I had come to find that I was one of these electro-sensitive people, and I'm a chemical-sensitive person. And no matter how clean I tried to make my environment there, the overall industrialization in South Florida was a detriment to my health. So moved down here to Costa Rica thinking that, it's so lush and green and organic, how wonderful, everything will grow. And come to find that the majority of Costa Rica had been denuded a few times, one from lumber, another from the cattle industry, and it uses 6 times the amount of chemicals per capita that any other country in the world uses. So it was like, whoa, that's a real shock to the system. So a bunch of people that had led the way, that pioneered down here in the organic food movement, they really started a bunch of permaculture farms in my area. And so for a few years, I worked on these permaculture farms trying to make good soil, essentially, because good plant, having a plant that's healthy and produces good food, it all comes down to the soil. And unfortunately, making good soil is probably one of the most arduous things ever if you're trying to do it in a timely manner. And so flipping compost piles and making effective microorganisms and doing all these things was like the bane of my existence for a good 3 years. And then one of my more genius friends told me to look up this thing called terra preta. And what that is Amazonian biochar. And apparently the conquistadors, when they had first invaded the area now known as Brazil, they found that it was more heavily cultivated than even the areas of Asia that they had been to. And that's something a lot of people don't know, that how intensively farmed what we know the Amazon rainforest was. That whole basin was this fertile crescent, but it wasn't naturally fertile. It had a lot of water, obviously, but the Amazonians were making this material where they were taking biomass, which is just, anything that you see that's green. Anything that's green will end up turning brown, and they would cook it down into these massive swaths of black carbon, and then they would just plant on top of it, and they would get incredible production and incredible yield. And the people that were investigating this could see these 1 and 2 and 3 kilometer lines of this biochar, this terra preta, and they just were amazed at what this was. And unfortunately, the conquistadors had brought their diseases, and that wiped out the majority of the populations in that basin. But when the natural forest came back, it got to plant itself in this incredible soil, and that's what became the primary weather driver of the world. And so when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, I can make soil easy. All I have to do is cook it. And I was already making all these types of wood-fired ovens. And I'm not of the mind that carbon is causing global warming. That's in all my studies, I found that to be a complete false accusation. In fact, when you look at what carbon is, it's not an insulator. It's a terrible insulator. It's a dielectric medium, so it would not hold heat. So anyway, I got into making carbon, and ever since then, the trees that I've been planting with it yield much quicker and much better fruit, and my plants are very healthy and happy. And as a result, and also the beautiful thing about this is my turnaround. I can make good soil in a month, whereas it would take a year to make good soil any other way. And by volume, I can make, given the same amount of biomass, I can make 900 times more. Because when you're just doing composting and things like that, you end up losing 90% of your biomass to the air. It just goes up in the air. So you do a lot of work for very little volume, and I'm naturally lazy, so I don't like putting a ton of time and energy into something that doesn't yield much. And it's also dangerous. That's another thing, is here when you have the compost piles, you have all these bad bacteria that infest the piles first. So if you're out there flipping them, oh my God, it's terrible. You get sick. The smell is terrible. It's horrible. You don't want to do that in a tropical environment. So being able to eliminate, flipping compost piles is a huge benefit. And now I'm selling biochar, and I'm selling biochar reactors, and we have a organic seed festival that's here August 5th. And that's funded by my friend's company, Vida Authentica, and we all share organic seeds, and we share growing practices and effective microorganisms and all these things to make the terrain, the geological terrain, healthy, so that our bioterrain is healthy. And I know that's something that you and Sophia have talked a bunch about.
It's very disturbing when you think about where the environment has gone. And you wouldn't know anything about it unless you began to research it and look into it. And one of the things that you and I were talking about before we got started with this call is this whole premise that Sophia actually tabled. I mean, she brought it into the spotlight, and she calls it the sepsis agenda, which says that we have cycles. We have an antiseptic cycle, which is the sunlight, and then we have the sepsis cycle, which is nighttime with the moonlight and so on. It is very apparent for those of us that are awake to this thing that what the controllers are doing is they're attempting, and I would say they're probably successful at it, at prolonging the sepsis cycle, or the unhealthy cycle, for lack of a better term. So that's becoming prolonged, and the antiseptic cycle is becoming shorter. So this is really affecting everything, right? It's affecting the food that we grow, because they need the natural cycle, the food does, in order to grow properly, and that cycle is not there anymore.
Other than making good soil, which is diamagnetic, and we have to remember that term, diamagnetic. Other than making good soil, I also make purified water. I make water where I vortex the water up to 1 million times per minute, and then I run it through a phase conjugate magnet array to make the water super diamagnetic also. Diamagnetic means it's the way you can look at it is the sun is diamagnetic. The sun isn't this nuclear fission or fusion ball that's 93 million miles away. It's actually water that's in its plasma condition, and its voltage. It's a source of infinite voltage, and it gives off this voltage in a direction. So whenever you have something going in two directions, that's diamagnetic. The problem with the sepsis agenda is it makes everything paramagnetic, and that's what the moon is. So she was bringing up the difference in moonlight to sunlight, and she is absolutely correct in this. The alchemists know this. The people, the naturalists knew this. The hermeticists knew this. What the moon is, it gives off a paramagnetic energy, meaning that the magnetic energy goes in every direction. So if you could imagine a sphere, instead of having, the energy move into the sphere at one point and then come out another point like it does in the sun, now the energy is moving in and out all points. It's almost like an omnidirectional magnetism. This creates chaos in a system. So my good friend down here, she introduced me to the full moon hike, and it's a pretty incredible thing to do, because where I live, I'm equidistant to three of these massive waterfalls, and we'd wake up at 2:00 in the morning and hike down to this place called the Nyaka Waterfall, and we do it during the full moon. And I could feel the difference in the energy from the moon. It creates this chaotic interaction with the body. Like, it really does. Like, I would feel like I was almost on fire, and it wasn't a thermal heat. It wasn't something like from a far infrared perspective that feels good, like when you're heated by a candle or a fireplace. It doesn't feel like that. It almost feels like a microwave energy. And oddly enough, the technologies that they're imparting on the planet are all microwave based, right? So this
like
all
5G, right?
Exactly. So this is all going hand in hand. And I'm a weird person. I've backed into all this stuff I've backed into it. Like, so what I mean by that was, I've been a body worker. Like, my main occupation is I do body work, and I was trained in Ayurvedic medicine. I do polarity therapy. I do cranial sacral biodialectic. I do all these things where you have to be very sensitive to energy flows. I also make soil and make water, or purify water. All these things you have to be extremely sensitive. So I've trained myself to be tuned to this type of energetic flow. And what the sepsis agenda is doing is exactly what she suggests. It's creating an omnipolar movement within biological organisms, which biological organisms do not like. The reason why I make biochar is because when you pyrolyze carbon, pyrolytic carbon, which is what biochar is the highest diamagnetic rating of any substance on the planet. Why is that important? It's important because only beneficial bacteria grow in a diamagnetic substance. So what occurs when you make all of the biology on the planet paramagnetic? Now those bacteria, guess what type of bacteria that propagates? That propagates the antibiotic bacteria, the things that are not pro-life. So I'm right on the same page as she is.
So, Christopher, let me ask this then. This becomes perplexing. So this doesn't appear to me to be something that is just happening by happenstance, that there has to be an amazing understanding of how life functions and thrives on Earth in order for these types of agendas to be put in place. As an example, the sepsis agenda. You and I talked earlier before the call about the aerosol spraying, fluoride in the water, all the stuff that you know, GMO foods, vaccines, flu shots, all this. So this is all not just one-off. This, to me, has to be, as hard as it is to get your head wrapped around it, coordinated at a higher level In other words, in order to have an overall sepsis agenda to put in place, something has to be coordinating this and putting it into play.
No, absolutely. I've told you this before, that the peak of our civilization was at the turn of the 20th century. So all the technologies that were about to come online right then, that were all thwarted, and then that's when the big lie, like the massive lie of this alternating current and all the other bullshit that they fed us, allopathic medicine, all of that stuff was figured out by 1895, 1898. We had wireless pulsed DC, which isn't even a DC current. It was actually creating a harmonic with the planet, and then a receiver where the ground would give you the energy. So it's not even, I can't even, likening it to electricity isn't even, you can't, it's apples to oranges, right? So all this was figured out. Nikola Tesla had figured it out. Quay had figured it out. Schauberger had figured out how to generate tons and tons of energy completely for free. In fact, it would build what he called qualigens in the environment. All of this was derailed because we're on a script. And I don't know who wrote the script. I don't know the origins of any of the stuff. You know, I just know that we're on the script, and the script is for things like as life as we know it to end. I mean, whether you look at it from a theological perspective, whether you look at it from a Vedic perspective, all the script is very concrete. And the people at the top of the food chain, I haven't met any of them directly, but I've met people that have played in their system, and I've known a few people that were very, very high up in the corporate world and the banking world, and their mindset was sociopathic, if not psychopathic, right? So the system in and of itself, like Max Egan says, is the problem. And I think people that are injured or have been traumatized, people that have this superiority complex because they're clever, they really have a real disdain for the common folk. And my fiance and I were talking about it last night. We were kind of philosophizing about it. It's just like, when you do not know the true self, you will become either a complete drone or you'll become a psychopath or a sociopath, because there's this energy of envy that occurs. And a lot of the mythology out there talks about this envy that occurs. And when you're around somebody that envies you and then represses that envy to the point where they want to get rid of you, I think that's really where the agenda is. Because there's this cold-hearted plan that is only working through deceit. And if there wasn't the deceit out there, the plan wouldn't be happening, right? So you look at the main cog in the way this whole thing is occurring, it's occurring through deceit. Well, that means the people that are doing this plan really have no power. And when you look at the way the Hermeticists and the ancients used to talk about demons, it's very similar to this. A demon is something that yields ultimate influence, but in and of itself has no power. So a demon will take somebody that has the power, i.e. the human race, you know, we're all making these decisions, but it will influence us in a direction to make poor decisions. Yeah. or be naive or whatever, right? So we get all this miseducation, we get all this, tinkering with our biology and our ecology and all this stuff. So we end up making bad decisions, and then we're judged accordingly for those bad decisions to help fuel the psychopathy of the people that are running it. So to me, I think this is all a script. And I think a lot of people are compromised. You know, I work on a ton of people, and Mike, out of the thousands of people I've massaged, I would say maybe 2. When I touched them, I was like, oh wow, this is a clean being. This is a being that is not running their trauma script. It's a very rare thing.
So, Christopher, this would, in my mind, say that we have unseen forces that are in play, that are being tapped into, and these unseen forces, as you were saying, they don't have the power from a physical perspective in order to make the changes in the physical realm here on Earth. They have to be able to influence humans to make that change. If humans did not or were not influenced by these forces, then we wouldn't be in the predicament. So we have a situation, if I'm hearing you correctly, we have a situation where we, and I'm talking about humanity, is its own worst enemy, right? In other words, we are being influenced by this very, it's a very, in my view, a very wicked, very evil force or kludge of beings or whatever it is. So, some people call it archons, whatever. I mean, is that what you're saying, that's what it's coming down to, that the reason why things are the way they are is because humans are being manipulated, and if they didn't allow that manipulation, I mean, we would have a whole different ball of wax?
It comes back, like I always will lean on my Vedanta Advaita roots, which is like the path of non-duality. I really think in the path of non-duality, they say, yeah, you can go out and explore, physicality all you want. Like, go ahead, have fun. I mean, it's there, but know the truth. Like, know what's actually sponsoring all this physicality. And there's an objective being that's impersonal, and that could be called God. You could call it whatever you want. I tend to not use the word God because that's a very weighted term, and that puts it in subjective reality. But they talk about this in the Vedic scriptures, like the physicality has to end. Like, you can go out and look for answers outside of yourself all you want. You can go out there and go explore all these pretty shiny things and get attached to the dramas of all this stuff. And yeah, you're going to be able to spend millions upon millions, endless amounts of lifetimes doing that. But it all comes back to recognizing the fourth wall, recognizing that which is sponsoring all of that. So I think right now what we're reaching is like what is termed in the Kali Yuga, it's like the end of the age, the end of the ages, is that those things that are happening outward, those things that are happening out in physicality, there is a devolution, there's a destruction that's occurring. Kali is coming in and eating it all, right? That's essentially what it says. And it's our job to recognize, okay, look, yes, physicality, this whole thing, it's out of our hands. This is happening. So what are we to do? We're here to actually recognize that which is eternal. Physicality is not eternal. It comes and goes. What is eternal? What's eternal is the being that sponsors your awareness, that allows you to be aware of this transitory state. And so come hell or high water, everybody is going to figure that out. Like, you have no choice in the matter. And unfortunately, as humans, like, we learn through trauma, we learn through our mistakes, right? And I think, and also I just want to put this out there, that I don't believe we're all equal, and I can't speak for anyone else. Anytime I've ever tried to go that route, it's been a mistake, right? I can't ever speak for what you're experiencing or what other people are experiencing. That's a completely subjective thing to me, right? When people talk about the world or civilization or society, I mean, I don't even know what any of that means. It's a concept, right? It's so big. It's so out of my purview. So I try and keep things local, like from the permaculture perspective. what I recognize locally is that people are enduring a lot of suffering. That suffering really, the suffering gets amplified if a person continually identifies with it. And I think this whole mechanism of physical reality is actually here, like Buddha said, life is suffering, there's a way out of the suffering. Like, this is a mechanism to get us to re-identify with our eternal being, not be so attached to the subjective physicality of things. And at the end of the Kali Yuga, I mean, that's its function, is like nobody can get away from that. When it's all puppy dogs and ice cream, of course you could play and like, oh, look, it's eternal sunshine. You're like, yeah, it's all great. But when things get rough, when things become adversarial, let's say, you really get to know where your attention is. And what I would like to see is people not turning their attention towards more entertainment, but people actually turning their attention towards their true self. And then maybe you would see things change. But I feel like this is just the end of an age. I think that's what we're witnessing.
So, Christopher, the end of this age, the Kali Yuga age, are the beings who control these events, are they doing what they are doing because it's part of closing out the Kali Yuga, or is it resistance to the inevitable, which would mean the loss of their power and control? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the demon always preys on your biggest weakness. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So you're going to have a whole range of motivations all the way up and down the food chain. So you're going to have some people that are truly evil, then you're going to have some people that aren't evil, but they have families and they really love their families, so they're trying to do the right thing for, there's going to be like an infinite range of bullshit out there. It doesn't matter. The demon uses your weakness against you, and just like it will just continually etch and tickle that itch right there until you fold, until you compromise. And this is why finding the objective, impersonal self is so important, because that's the only time that you can be free of the subjective reality where you can actually say no. I had the experience of coming face to face with what I would consider the one of the arch demons out there, because it really negatively affected an organization that I was with. And out of no energy of my own, something else occurred that really helped me have space to see it. Like I was just blessed to be able to see this outer influence. And this thing got very agitated that I stopped its influence. And I didn't even stop the influence. Just an energy came through me that stopped the influence. Like I had nothing to do with it. And so when it visited me, it really tried to scare the shit out of me. And I was lucky enough that one of my guides was there. One of my guardian angels was there with me to really like tell me to breathe. And she explained to me how demons work. And she said to me exactly what I said before. Demons possess incredible influence, but no power. They influence you to use your power. You're the one with the power. And that's really the anger that the demon has. The reason why Lucifer is so pissed off, let's just say Lucifer is the archdemon. And let's just say that the world is under a Luciferian agenda. That demon is so angry that we are like the creator because we possess this impersonal, objective source energy, and we touch it every day when we fall asleep. We drop into this complete rest state where we're completely safe. No matter who you are on the planet, if you're a human, you sleep. Even if you're a terrible sleeper, even if you only get like 30 seconds of sleep, at least every day, everyone touches sleep. And if you don't touch sleep, guess what? You're But let's just say the majority of people out there get to sleep. When you fall into that complete rest state, you are in God. You are in your impersonal, objective, complete rest cycle. This thing does not know that. It has never known rest. Imagine that. Imagine if you were that being. You've never known rest. It is so jealous. It is so envious that it wants to destroy God's creation to spite God. That's the vehemence that's behind this agenda this sepsis agenda. And a lot of people, and by the way, I'm not a Bible-toting Christian or anything like that, but there is some truth to that mythology. There is some nuggets of wisdom in almost all the mythologies. And that particular mythology, I think, really, really gets to the core of the psychology that's behind this psychopathic agenda. And to answer your question specifically, I think that has to happen at the end of the age. I don't think everybody feels like they're doing it for some righteous purpose. I don't think many people do anything consciously, actually. I think most people are running programs, and I really feel there's very few people that get to touch spontaneous genius that is sponsored by the impersonal self. And from the largest contextual perspective, in a way, I think this has to happen. And I think it's happened before. I think all the megalithic sites and all these things that are out there that show us that there were civilizations that were more advanced than us, they probably had the same thing go on.
So it's a cycle then.
It is.
And it's a cycle. But let me pose this question to you then. How about the concept that Earth is a realm? And there could be multiple realms of Earth. There's versions of Earth above where we are, and there's versions of Earth below us. And we happen to be, let's just say, in the middle realm. How about this thought where it's a school, it's a classroom, and this classroom is a realm that we have to, from a soul perspective, that we have to attend. We have to attend this class. We have to flow through it. But the problem is that this course is designed to disconnect you from source. It's designed to disconnect you from the creator. And it does that through lies and deception and all that stuff. And doing all the things that are going on, the whole sepsis agenda as an example. So what's happened is that the souls that come in, they have a curriculum. They have a plan in place in which to learn, to develop their soul. But what happens is many souls become lost. In other words, they lose control of the vehicle. They lose control of their mind and their body. And so they wind up banging around in this realm. Think of it as like it's a room, a big room, and it's packed. And there's a door, but they don't know about the door because they're so preoccupied with all of the stuff that they're given in this realm. As an example, all of the entertainment, all the stuff that occupies most people's lives that are just entirely unproductive. All that stuff is put out there in order to keep you in the theater. And it's not until you understand and realize that you are actually in a play or that you're watching a play that you begin to see that there's a door in the room. There are those of us that have come down to incarnate in order to get as many of the souls as possible to understand that there's a door in that room, guys. And if you continue to operate in this circus and interact in it, you're going to keep coming back. It's going to be a karmic cycle. You're going to have to keep doing it over and over and over again until you realize what this is all about.
I like that metaphor for life. The only problem is I've been a practicing astrologer for 10 years. And the thing that astrology has taught me is we do not have as much control as we think we do. The subtle really does control the gross. And I've been exposed to Hermeticism and very deep levels of astrology that aren't the standard horoscopal bullshit that most people are exposed to. Things that are based on what this realm actually is. And when you start to look at things through that lens, it's like Shakespeare says, we're all players in this game. We are the physicality. I'm going to break it down this way. Physicality is a subjective experience. if you're attached to physicality, you're just attached to subjectivity. I think what we are is we're little nodal points, little biological avatars for God to experience its creation through a subjective lens. It's like a creative way in which God could see its experiment. But that's not what we actually are. We are the objective, impersonal being that sponsors our subjective outlook. So the school, if there is any school, isn't all the bullshit lessons that people are overcoming their traumas and blah, blah, blah. All that's all been predetermined. There's one lesson. There's just one, and that's to recognize your impersonal self. And you come back and you continually play in this physical realm until you recognize subjectivity or subjective awareness is fool's gold. That's all it is. It's fool's gold. And you can go down every single rabbit hole, and it's going to lead to the end of an age. That's just what it does. Because the school has one lesson. Yes, subjectivity is cool, but hey, remember this impersonal, objective being that is prior to all of it. And then who's to say what happens? I don't know. But like, if you're attached, I mean, you could just see it on the most mundane level. Like, if you're attached to physicality, no matter what, you're going to be miserable. Yeah. Everything goes away. Right. Everything. No matter how great it is, it has a start, a beginning, a midlife, and an ending. Like, go ahead, play in that as much as you want. So the intelligence here is like recognizing, having a large enough overview in your being to be like, wait a minute. Everything starts. If it starts, it ends. Everything. Why am I so attached to it? Yeah. Right? And then you start to gain some space. And then you're not this reactionary thing. But getting back to your question, I don't think people really have a choice in that. I really think, it's crazy, Mike, when I look at people's charts. Like, the chart wins. Their willpower does not win. It does not.
It's predestined?
It really is. I have to be honest, man, because when I look at this stuff, all the best things in my life have been surprises. All the best things in my life. I didn't see my fiance coming out of the woods. I didn't see my football career. I didn't see meeting so-and-so. I didn't plan those things to occur. Like, let's be really honest. Like, out of all the things that are happening to you right now, or have happened to you right now, how much of you were actually in that?
That's a very good point. As you're going through this, I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking about my own life. And I'm thinking about things that happened in my life, that I actually sit down and strategize and say, at this point, on this day, and in this year, this is going to happen. And the answer is no.
That's why they hid real astrology. That's why they hid it. They hid it because once you become aware of the clockwork that you're in, there is only one thing that you can do, and that is become aware of your objective being.
So, Christopher, when you talk about becoming aware of your objective being, I just want to make it clear for the audience. Are you speaking in terms of, and I'll use another phrase, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, is this connecting back to your understanding of your divine aspect, that you are a divine being?
No, that's all subjective, because when you say divine, so the way I like to liken it is we've all watched movies. We're lucky to live in the TV and movie era. And in the TV and the movie era, people get so caught up in the drama that's in front of them. But there's this thing called the fourth wall. And the fourth wall is where you have the camera and the booms and the mics, and you have all this stuff that goes on to allow that drama to be recorded, right?
Right.
Each one of us has a being that is that fourth wall. if you could just like really be clear and recognize everything that has ever happened to you has happened in front of you. There's never been anything that has happened behind you. It might have happened behind your physical being, but nothing has ever happened behind your awareness. Everything is in front of your awareness.
Okay, so is your awareness, again, I'm trying to get this some context for the audience. Is your awareness then your soul self, your spiritual self? I mean, your spirit?
No, your awareness is still part of the subjective realm. So this is where it gets fun. The perceiver and the perceived occur at the same time. So this is where quantum physics is like taking us to the end of the world, to the end of the age. They've figured this out. Like this has been very, very well known for, 80 years or so. Like it's very obvious. Even on a mechanical level, there are machines that know this. That which is perceived and the perceiver arise simultaneously. Even that is in front of your being. Your being is prior to the perceiver and the perceived. You are a human being. You are not a human doing. You're not a human perceiving. The being is at complete rest. And the demons that are creating all these problems for us out there, supposedly, they don't know this being. They're never at rest. They're never at rest. We all get to touch rest. And we all touch it more often than we know. We're just unconscious of it. It is ourself. It's like you can't tell a fish that it's wet. The fish has always been in water, so the fish doesn't have any contrast. So we're all like, I'm not even going to say we're all. I'm trying to get out of that type of talking. There's a tendency for total immersion in subjectivity. Once there's the recognition that the perceiver and the perceived has always been in front of you, life shifts. Everything shifts. That is the only paradigm shift worth talking about. Because then you recognize, physicality, experience, activity, all of this is within this realm of subjectivity that is really just going to do what it's going to do. It's all been pre-programmed. But this objective impersonal being that is here, that is completely at rest, has absolutely zero problems with anything. Because all that subjectivity, all that activity that's happening out there, that has to happen.
Where does that being that's at rest, where does that being reside?
This is the fun part. This is the quantum mechanics of it. That's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. From the subject, because remember, we compare everything in the subjective realm. That's what subjectivity is. It's comparison. So it's really ironic to talk about complete objectivity in being from a subjective viewpoint. That's why they say the person that becomes enlightened, the first thing that they do is just laugh their ass off. Because it is quite hilarious. It's a funny, funny thing. All the drama, all the attachment, all the fight, all these things that have been going on is all within this realm that is geared for that. That's what that realm is there to do. It's to get you to be like, wait a minute, huh? And then you revert back into your being. And so that being, and this is, I hate the New Age movement in a lot of ways, but in the New Age movement, there's this whole like, I'm not even going to digress and go back into that. Essentially, the being that is what I would consider my impersonal self is the same that's your impersonal self.
Okay, so it sounds like you're staying away from a spiritual component to this, that you're staying away from a metaphysical foundation for this. And that's why I keep asking the question. I'm trying to understand, what does it mean at the end of the day? So you have this impersonal being. Where does that impersonal being reside? What does this impersonal being do? You had to come from someplace to be here. So where would that place be that you came from to come to Earth to incarnate? I guess is what I'm driving at.
No, all of that is actually within your being. All of that is within your being. So this is the thing, is like it's once you actually recognize, like once you get to that place where you're out of subjectivity and you're in the complete rest state. So this is kind of fun to talk about quantum computing and this at the same time because they're analogous. In quantum computing, they have to supercool these different processors, right? And this gets back to diamagnetism and what we were talking about earlier with the soil and water and everything, right? When you supercool something, you reduce the activity around it. When you bring something into ultimate stillness, then it can know everything. So that's essentially what our being is. Our being, which is your being and my being, it's all the same being. But it wants to have, you got to understand this. This is the craziest thing, and this is what rocks a lot of people's boats. No matter how traumatic life is, the being wants to have that experience because everything has to occur from its perspective because it's infinite. It is ultimate stillness. Ultimate stillness begets ultimate activity. That's why this whole thing is cyclical. So it's really terrible to say this in one way because it takes away morality. But it only takes away morality if you get to that purely objective, impersonal side of things. As long as you're still in and identifying with all the subjective things that are going on, you really have to – it would be best if you can – abide to those moral codes. Because in all honesty, those moral codes help you actually get to the impersonal self, help you realize the impersonal being much, much quicker. If you're greedy and nefarious and use deceit to get what it is that you want and have no empathy and no sympathy and all those types of things, that reduces your level of sensitivity. And when you reduce your sensitivity to a certain point, you will never be able to become sensitive enough to be aware of your fourth wall.
Well, why does the impersonal being want this experience then?
The impersonal self, the being that is, it is infinite. So by its nature, everything has to occur. A lot of people don't know what infinity is. Infinity, by definition, means everything has to happen. Every possibility. Every possibility.
Okay.
So right now, you and I, we're having a conversation. I subjectively am talking to this other person, Mike Williams, on Skype. And there's all these characteristics of where I am relative to where you are. And we could go into the story, right? And the story has infinite variables, right? From the impersonal being's perspective, all those variables run out into infinitum. They have to be there because it is infinite. And and this is my personal opinion, I could be wrong because it's coming from a personality, it's coming from an ego. What I'm really thinking is that we're just these nodal points for this impersonal self to have the experience of subjectivity.
But why does it want that experience, Christopher? Are you saying that there is no choice?
It's not that it wants it, Mike. It's not that it wants it. It's just something that has to occur because it's infinite.
Okay. All right.
If it's infinite, that means everything has to happen. And so as it's infinite, there will be various changes per cycle. Those changes will create different things. And like I said, because it is infinite, there's infinite possibilities out there. Like you could have aspects of the personality that's within it thinking, oh, I'm going to become it or I'm going to become greater than it. All of these things have to occur.
Christopher, this is very existential. I mean, basically, it almost sounds like that there is no value to any of this. In other words, it's just going to happen. It's going to happen no matter what. It's really not a matter of planning. It's not a matter of having a soul or a spirit for development or any of that stuff. It just sounds like, well, this is it's just like you wind a clock up and it just keeps ticking along.
So here's the craziest thing. The more objective, well, I can phrase it this way. I've had the blessing of being around extremely high performers, and I've been able to perform very, very well in very high stakes situations. And in those situations, what certain people call the zone, you hear that a lot of athletes talk about this. You're in your impersonal self. There is no ego there thinking or trying to perform or trying to do better or anything like that. You drop into this space that is very egoless, and there's no resistance in your circuit, so you do very well, right? What occurs to a person once they start to really, really fall into the fourth wall and being in this impersonal space is they just become better people. It's the weirdest thing. It's not egoic driven, like somebody donating $1 billion to some charity so everybody else could see it. Because it is your essence, you end up becoming a light unto the world. But it's not of your own doing. It's the weirdest thing. It's an egoless, non-personal motivated thing. And that's what I'm saying is like it's the weirdest thing, and I don't have all the answers at all.
Yeah.
Like I don't know all the different things. All I know is my experience, and all I know is my dropping out of experience. But what I've witnessed is the people that have been able to touch this space are all pretty saintly people. They end up doing really good work.
When you said that you're in the zone, I completely get it, because as you were talking about it, I get there when writing and recording music.
Right.
Because what happens is I set aside everything else. I'm not talking about the New World Order, and I'm not doing other things. I'm in this zone, and I'm just focused on doing what I have to do. And what I found is that when I'm in that zone, and even after I'm done being in that zone, in other words, I've completed doing whatever it is I was doing with the guitar or the recording, I feel very at peace. A lot of things, many things that were maybe bothering me before or irritating me or that were on my mind, they're gone.
Right.
So it's very interesting what you just said there, because I was related to it immediately as you were talking about it.
It's really been brilliant. I mean, that's why a lot of athletes get depressed after their careers, is because they're no longer in a venue where they get to be in the zone. So all the damage that they had done to their body, trying to get the rewards of this sociopathic system that's out there, at least they got to touch the zone here and there,
Yeah.
And now they don't have that, and so they get really, really downtrodden. So that's what kind of drove me into the path of Vedanta Advaita. Like, I was a ex-pro athlete, and I got really depressed. Like, I was like, I have no life skills. Like I know how to kick a football. Who cares? That doesn't really do anything for me. And I was very lucky that I had a mentor that introduced me to meditation. And by the way, all this was in my stars. I had no control over this. I really want to put this out there. This was a surprise. This was not something I went looking for or anything like that. This was completely out of the blue. Here, why don't you try meditation? And within 10 minutes, I was in a transcendental experience. And I got to see it, like I pierced the veil the very first time I meditated, and it hooked me. So the thing with all this is, I just take a step back every once in a while. I go, what do I know? And I go, I know that the best things in my life have been surprises. I had nothing to do with them. Also, I know the best performances I've ever given in my life have been completely spontaneous. I've been in what's called the zone. I also know that when I experience being without subjectivity, I feel the most rested. I get, like, in what would be considered 5 minutes of being, I get an 8 hour sleep. Like, that's what it would be the equivalent to. And I come out and I'm no longer at the mercy of subjective reality. And I just have to, whether or not any of these mythological beings were real, whether Siddhartha was real or Jesus was real, Minerva, whoever these people were, their actual messages are actually very clear. And they all say the same thing. They say this realm is the suffering realm. If you're attached to the suffering realm, well, good, you get to suffer. But if you actually recognize where your true wealth is, you're free of this realm.
Yeah.
You're free of it. And they all say the same thing. They just say it in a different cultural milieu so we can understand it.
I agree with that, by the way. I mean, that's something that I've been telling people that, once you shake off this realm and you understand what this realm is about, then it's very freeing.
And I don't want to discount people's suffering, because I do a type of body work called biodialectic craniosacral work. And it's really about bearing witness to a person's parasympathetic nervous system. So I experience on a very profound level people's trauma history. Like the nervous system carries it all. And so, I will start to bear witness to the signaling that their body gives me, and their body is so happy, absolutely so happy that it gets to express itself and let go of these things. But this is what I've noticed. When you're bearing witness, you have to be completely objective to be effective. Meaning you're witnessing without trying to modify anything. You're just in pure witnessing awareness. That's the only time something moves through. That's the only time. If I'm sitting there and I get caught in the subjective storyline and the drama and all these other things, it actually sends a suppressor signal to whatever that is in the body. But if I don't, and I can just be with it as it is, it starts to move, and the people have profound, absolutely incredible clearings. And, that flies in the face of convention. You would think, the more you do, the better the output. It's not that at all. It's really when you recognize what's doing it all, that's when you actually become effective.
Now, you mentioned earlier about your spirit guide. Do you subscribe then to, let's say, other realms or dimensions of existence?
Absolutely, yeah. Because it all has to be happening. Remember, the objective impersonal self is infinite. So everything has to happen. And so in that there's, who's to say how many different dimensions there are? There's tons of dimensions. But I have had personal I've had, guardian angels. My life has been saved by them. It's an incredible thing. We live in a very multi-dimensional, phenomenal experience.
Well, I always tell folks, Christopher, that whenever I have these conversations, is that it's much more complex and far more dynamic than you've ever been taught or told, or that you would like to believe. And it gets to the point where it's so dynamic that a lot of people have just a lot of trouble getting their heads wrapped around it, because it's just not something they can comprehend. Like you talked about being infinite. That people do not understand what infinite is, because we are experiencing a physical existence in a finite realm.
Right.
Everything has a beginning, everything has an end. So when you start talking to people about something doesn't have a beginning or something doesn't have an end, they short circuit.
Absolutely. And this is why this is some wisdom that almost all the different teachings, at least the major teachings have out there, is if your authority is physical experience, you are going to be in misery. And a lot of people are starting to see this with the Mandela effect, right? Or the Mandela effect.
Yep.
They have built their structure, their entire existence around what they've remembered, right? And their egoic structure is such that they're attached to their memories being a certain thing. Well, I'm sorry to tell people, but there's technology out there that's modifying memories. There's so much technology out there that will disrupt your biological quantum computer, which is trying to give you this consistent, for lack of a better term, physical reality. But at the end of the age, and this is something that everybody's really going to start to experience very heavily, starting August 21st throughout the end of this year and from then on, is consistency is going to fly out the window.
Now you say August 21st. I think we're supposed to have an eclipse. Is that why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, there's a lunar eclipse that's 2 weeks before, and that's when things will really start to kick off.
Okay.
On August 7th or 8th, but then August 21st, especially in North America, most people identify with the continuity of their memories as being them. Wouldn't you suggest that?
Yeah.
Like with your work, you do hypnotism, right? And you regress people so that they can see their continuity. If you're attached to your continuity as that which is you, you're going to be very, very heartbroken in the coming years, because all of that flies out the window at the end of the age. All institutions, including the institution of your continuity, really gets to be disrupted. So people really need to – I shouldn't say really need, because that sounds dramatic. If a person wants to kind of weather this storm, this storm of discontinuity, I would say it would be best for them to recognize their objective impersonal self.
Yeah, and just stepping back to the Mandela effect, it's interesting. Max and I just had this conversation. I spoke to Max about 2 weeks ago, and I just uploaded the show the other day. Now, the whole thing with being able to alter memories. It sounds to me like, Christopher, it's another way in which they will keep you. When I say they, I'm talking about the people that are controllers and doing the work of whomever, to keep you in that state of being subjective. So in other words,
right.
If, as an example, your memory is different than what is being told today, your subjectiveness kicks in, right? Because now you're going to start doing comparisons.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so it's very interesting. And I agree with you 100% that there is technology out there and that the Mandela effect is real.
Yes.
And it's very real. And it's not a fluke. There is something going on. And I do believe it's technology that's being utilized, which is altering memories.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, let me ask you, you talked about quantum computing, Christopher. What about, D-Wave and CERN? Do you believe that they're using these technologies in order to tap into other dimensions, other realms? In other words, has our realm become contaminated by breaking through walls that they shouldn't have broken through, and now we have bleed through and we have overlap?
I don't have any direct experience with quantum computing as it's been, portrayed, or CERN as it's been portrayed. I think there is some truth that it's obvious that they're trying to pierce the veil. I know the majority of the science that they promote to the masses is a complete lie. Like, I know that they're not trying to break particles, because particles, as they say they are, don't exist. So I think it's much more like all you have to do is look at all their occult symbolism. Like, the symbolism would denote exactly what their purpose is. Like, I watched when they opened CERN to the public in that crazy ceremony that they had.
Yeah.
It was the most absurd thing. And I talk with Tracy Twyman a bunch, and she's an adept in knowing what all this occult symbolism means, and she's like, that's a straight up satanic ritual. Like, that's what the OTO and a bunch of other people like to do. And So I don't have any direct experience with any of that as it is. I know usually when I know what they're lying about. Like, so when they bring up, the terrible physics that they're trying to get people to believe, I know it's for a totally different agenda than what they're actually saying it is. And I'm really big into geomancy. Like, I think there's ley lines and dragon lines, and I'm sensitive enough to those types of energies to be like, oh my goodness, this particular area of land really has a resonant frequency. And apparently where CERN is in a very ancient area that was I don't know if it was predicted or if the Romans actually had their temples there, but it was one of these things that it was essentially, for lack of a better word, like the Tower of Babylon type area. It was right where CERN is right now, so, or something of that vein.
Yeah.
So these people, they're occultists. And I wouldn't even say occultist. They're only occultist to those people that believe the mainstream narrative. So they're only occultist to those people that have been occulted.
Yeah.
Like, so to me, it's like,
if you're in the club, it's not very hidden, right?
Right. Like, if you put that much money into the biggest building in the world, give me a break. Of course it's for something nefarious. Like, where does all the investment in this world go these days? It goes to nefarious means. So I'm sort of a simpleton with all that. For me, I have a lot of friends that are, I shouldn't say a lot. I have 3 friends that are shamans. And these are very good-hearted people. They have very pure intentions. And they are very aware of the astral plane. I'm not really aware of the astral plane at all. And all of them are telling me that, like, that plane of existence is so full of entities right now. They say it's like, it's crazy how many beings are there right now. There's like a backlog, and it's like, they just say it's full, like it's totally full. So
yeah, it's like the room I was talking about before. It's just all packed. Yeah.
Right. So maybe everybody's here to see the end of the story. I don't know, but all of this, to me, I have such confidence in our being. A lot of people use the word namaste, and they don't use it with really knowing what it is. Like, people say the word infinity, and they don't recognize the absolute confounding, magnitude of the word infinity. Well, people don't understand what namaste really is. And namaste is, I'm recognizing the being that I am, and in recognizing that, I recognize the being that you are. It has nothing to do with your personality. It has to do with your sponsoring essence. It's the sponsoring essence, and I have so much confidence in that, because whenever I'm lucky enough to fall into that essence, there's some real genius, there's some real beauty that occurs in the world around me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's what I keep falling back on.
Going back just for a moment, because I wrote down to ask you about this. You mentioned August 21st and then going forward, and there's going to be changes. So what are you thinking is going to happen from August 21st on?
Well, the luminaries in the sky are taking us out of an age where institution and structure was really the name of the game. So we're all under influence from the subtle energy, and I know a lot of people don't like to believe that, but that's just where I'm coming from. And the subtle energies over the last couple of 100 years have been very rooted in the continuity of institutions. So people will inherently trust institutions and not even know why. And so what I'm seeing in the truth movement and all this alternative media and all the way that information has been able to proliferate, there's really not that much trust in institutions anymore. And what we're actually going to start to see is now that has been, that trust has been disrupted, magic only works if there's trust, right? So once the trust is broken, the magic is gone. So you're going to start to see these institutions that were built on black magic start to fail. And just like anything that any mad dog that's backed into a corner, when it starts to fail, it gets very violent. And that's what the luminaries are pointing to.
And their inability to be able to steer consciousness, right? Because if you don't have the masses don't have the trust in the institutions, then what that means is that there's going to be a lot of scrutiny with regard to anything that comes out by these institutions. Institutions, I'm talking about the military, the government, academia, right, and so on, right? So what will happen is, whereas before they were able to use their black magic to be able to steer consciousness and thought in order to create their reality or to achieve their objectives, that's going to be a lot more difficult, if not impossible, as more and more people start to question the narrative.
That's why they have to roll out 5G. That's why that's being implemented. Because all of this, for as much as I know the luminaries, they know it better than I do. They know that the end of the age is here. And I'm of the mind that because they're so forgetful of their being essence, they really feel that they'll be able to circumvent the catastrophe that kind of reboots the system by invading all biology. That's really why I think this agenda is so complete, is they feel like somehow, some way, we're going to get past this firewall that nature has, that hasn't let us through before.
So they're in self-preservation mode then?
Absolutely, because they're selfless. They're actually not selfless, but they're not aware of their self, so they're under that sponsorship, if that makes any sense.
So it's a very selfish agenda that's at play. And so they're rolling out everything they can roll out, including the kitchen sink, in order to preserve their domain, which they believe that they control.
Exactly. Like I said, I backed into all this, and I see it more from the spiritual side of it. Like this, the demonic energy doesn't have any power. It really doesn't. And so imagine that. Imagine if you felt powerless. So it's quite ironic that it has all this military might, but all of this is in phenomenality. All of this is in the subjective temporal realm, and it knows it. So of course it would be so ridiculously out of whack.
Yeah, so it's propping itself up, if you will, on the false pretense.
Right. It's a false idol. That's exactly what it is. That's why I'm saying there's a lot of intelligence to these these religious mythologies. There's a ton of intelligence to it. I mean, everything in our day and age, in the Kali Yuga, you just know everything has been co-opted. None of the history we know is accurate. Pretty much we're running on lies on top of lies on top of lies on top of lies. That's why the whole point of the Kali Yuga was surmised between Arjuna and Krishna, because Arjuna was so upset that Krishna is showing him endless wars and battles and strife and love and all this stuff, and he's just so despondent and apathetic. And he's like, why all of this? And Krishna was just like, he just said to him, he goes, well, the Kali Yuga is here for your soul to learn courage. And so the courage for us in today's world is like, none of us are going to beat the military industrial complex, That's not what the courage is. The courage comes into really finding out what sponsors your being. It's a philosophical courage.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, excuse me when I get into those generalizations. Most people avoid looking at themselves. That's a very accurate thing to say. A lot of people want to go out and project outwards, but the heart of all philosophy and all religion is know thyself. And so that's a biggie. That's really why we're here, is to know thyself. And the beauty is, to know yourself, then you have the space to actually be able to be a light unto this world.
Very well said. This is the type of stuff that I've been trying to communicate to folks as well, Christopher. And I've been telling folks that I had come to the conclusion a while ago that trying to crack the whip to make some kind of change in the physical realm was a complete waste of time. It's just not going to happen. So it made me take a step back. It made me pause and say, okay, look, so if it's not about changing the physical world or this realm, then what's it about?
Yes. It's really cool. In Vedanta Advaita, they couple, the path of self-inquiry, which is called Atma Vichara, with the path of non-doership. They have to go together. And the reason why is just like we were talking about being in the zone. The irony of the zone is you perform best when you're not there performing. Like literally, the genius is spontaneous because you're not the one doing it. It's just happening.
Yeah.
And this is what, to the Western mind, you tell them that there is no such thing as free will, that they're not the one doing it. That's such a out of the left field concept to them that they'll want to term it in some nihilistic way or anything like that. And that's not what it means at all. I only like saying that to high performers, people that have actually already experienced it.
Yeah.
Because then they can relate to it. A person that doesn't have a memory or a consistent input that shows them that, when you tell them that, they get very nihilistic. So it's not a benefit to them.
Yeah, well, that's why I was kind of poking around a little bit earlier in the conversation to try to pull that out, because this conversation, it's very thought-provoking, but it's going to give a lot of people frequency jam.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But it always does. This is the beautiful thing about our existence. Everything will give you frequency jam unless it's your time to get it.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like we can deny timing. We can deny that these other things are at work. We can do that, but go ahead and do that, and you're going to be forced into a very insensitive space. My trip has been one of sensitivity. So for whatever reason, I've been wired to be a sensitive person, and the more sensitive I get, and the more I'm aware to take the signals from my environment, and the more I'm able to touch my being, the more I actually see those other people that have a high level of sensitivity, they end up being beneficial. And the people that I see that don't have high sensitivity, ironically, they're physically healthier because they're more calloused, But at the same time, their actions and what they're doing are destructive. But when I say that, that's all within the physical realm. I'm under no illusion. I know that it's all just happening. If they could do it any differently, they would, but they can't. It's just what's happening.
Now, for folks that don't come around, Christopher, in other words, they don't really understand what this is all about. In other words, they don't really come to the point where they're understanding their objective self or their impersonal self. What does that mean for them? Does that mean that they get to experience this type of realm over and over and over and over again? What happens if somebody doesn't wake up, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's like a spiritual hormetic stress. So hormetic means it's a beneficial stress. So misery is a beneficial spiritual stress. And so what occurs is the more, subjective you are and the more you're like attached to that aspect of things, your overall expression is going to be, you're going to end up being miserable. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that some people that haven't been completely subjective haven't died happy, because of course everything is possible. But as a whole, as I understand it, and just what I see in the dropping of quality in this time and age that I live in, is that with the level of depression that people are going through, the level of pain that people are going through, to me, it's a sign, it's an indicator. Oh, okay, we're in the Kali Yuga. We've had very wise people in the past tell us about these things before. What do these wise people actually say? They say life is misery, but there's a way out of the misery. Know thyself. So I'm sort of following the game plan that people that are much wiser than me have put out there. And I say to people, I always talk to them. I reference them. I always bring them back to their own experience. Most people that come to me are in a lot of pain, and they're seeking pleasure to mitigate their pain. And after a while, the pleasure that I give them won't mitigate their pain anymore, because, the pleasure pain principle is a self-defeating cycle. So then they'll start to ask deeper questions, and depending on the questions they ask will be depending on the information that they're given. People can only receive what they can receive. And that's another thing people don't like to hear, because the ego wants to believe that it knows it can receive anything. But like, if you're like a 12 gauge wire, you can't receive a million, amps of energy. You'd be incinerated.
Right.
So like you have to be primed. The pump is always primed. Our spiritual pump is always being primed. And it's a timing thing. It really is a timing thing. So what I like to do to give people a little respite is if they're open to it, I'll talk to them about just being aware that everything that they're aware of has always been in front of them. And if they can get that one little tidbit, if they can just touch that, then they can, somewhere in their consciousness, they can start to really get to a point where they can be in the zone, where they can be in a cleaner experience.
Well, really a great conversation. Very, very thought-provoking, and I think it's going to hopefully make people think. Some folks are going to be a little taken back by it from the standpoint it's ground I think that a lot of people have not investigated or researched or even thought about in any way. So, but that's okay, right? That's what these types of conversations are all about. They're all about trying to get people to think through things and to start to process through areas of thought, areas of consciousness that they may never, ever have ventured down that path if it wasn't for the fact that, we could bring folks like yourself onto the show to raise the flag on these things and to make people become more aware of different viewpoints and concepts and stuff like that. And you're really good at thinking through this stuff, and I'm really glad that we connected today. Now, Christopher, for people to connect with you, websites, YouTube channels and all that stuff, Facebook, what would you like to share?
I'm BioCharisma on both Facebook, and then biocharisma.com is my website. I have a podcast that I broadcast on Stitcher and iTunes called the BioCharisma Podcast. I want people to know that I'm actually a very physical person. Like, even though I talk about all this Vedanta Advaita and all this stuff, that doesn't mean I'm like sitting on pillows all day and meditating or anything like that. Like, I run 3 companies. I work full time. I'm building, sculpting, doing tons of things in the physical world just because that's what my body has to do. Like that's just what it's wired to do. So, I want people to know that coming into this type of information does not need to negate their physical experience. What it does is it gives them a space where they are not reactionary. What the demons want people to be is reactionary. When you're in fear, you're reactionary. You don't allow any of your attention to go to your prefrontal cortex. You're reacting from your medulla. You're reacting from this old primal instinctual thing. And when you're consistently reacting, you don't have any space. And so the whole reason for this conversation is just so people can gain a little space, gain a little respite, so that when things are occurring around them, they can keep their wits about them and not be pulled into the undertow of what the majority are going through.
As you know, Christopher, you have an open invite to come back anytime, and I really enjoy our conversations because they just really spark a lot of different types of thoughts, and I know when I get done talking with you that I walk away with some things to contemplate, and this is one of those conversations. So thank you for coming on.
Well, Mike, I love your work. Best of luck to you, and I love our friendship, and I really look forward to seeing what you got coming out, and we'll talk soon.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
I just